At dawn on May 16, 2026, a group of men inside a fortified compound in Metele, Borno State, picked up their weapons and began to fight back. They had been found. They knew it. The leader among them had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. Decoys, aliases, rotating safe houses, a security detail trained for a last stand. What none of them knew was that the men outside had already been watching for 5 months, and that the satellite phone on the table in the center of the room, the one he'd used to coordinate strikes across a dozen countries, had already told them everything they needed. The compound did not survive the morning. Between 2014 and 2026, the Islamic State ran operations across 12 provinces spanning 3 continents. It funded bombings in Somalia, drone attacks in the Sahel, and kidnappings in the Lake Chad Basin, all coordinated through a single administrative organ called the General Directorate of Provinces. 12 provinces, 1 man at the top, and for nearly 2 years, that man was officially dead. How do you hunt someone who has already been declared eliminated? And what happens when the system built to track him trusted the wrong report? The story begins in a village called Mainok, roughly 58 kilometers west of Maiduguri in northeastern Nigeria. In the early 2000s, a young man ran a barber's shop there. Nothing about him suggested what was coming. He cut hair. He knew his customers by name. His town gave him his alias, Al-Minuki, the one from Mainok. He was drawn into the orbit of Muhammad Yusuf, a charismatic preacher who would go on to found Boko Haram, and like hundreds of other young men in the region, he crossed a line that does not run back. By 2015, he was no longer a barber. He was the Lake Chad area commander of the newly formed Islamic State West Africa province, known as ISWAP. And he was already breaking with the leadership above him. How do you consolidate power inside an organization that has no elections, no courts, and no appeals? And what happens when the man you answer to refuses a direct order from the global caliphate? Abubakar Shekau, then the head of Boko Haram, refused an explicit directive from ISIS Central Command to send fighters to North Africa. Al-Minuki defied him. He facilitated the deployment himself. It was an act of insubordination that should have gotten him killed. Instead, it got him promoted. The fighters went to Libya. The rift with Shekau deepened, and Al-Minuki's reputation inside the global ISIS hierarchy solidified into something more durable than loyalty: usefulness. Over the next 8 years, he climbed. In 2018, following the assassination of ISWAP Chief Maman Noor, a rival Al-Minuki had long opposed, he assumed regional command. That same year, his network was linked to the coordinated kidnapping of more than 100 schoolgirls in Yobe State. In 2023, 2 of Muhammad Yusuf's sons, who had led ISWAP since its founding, were killed in separate operations. Al-Minuki stepped into the vacuum. The U.S. State Department designated him a specially designated global terrorist in June of that year. Then, in 2024, the Nigerian military announced he was dead. The satellite phone sat in an evidence photograph. It looked like any other device, scuffed, cheap, replaceable. But the number had been active. The voice on intercepted calls had been run through recognition software. The movements mapped to it didn't match the forest in Kaduna State where the Nigerian military said the body was found. The Birnin Gwari Theater in northwestern Nigeria had never been within Al-Minuki's operational sphere. Why does an institution announce a confirmed kill when the evidence it holds points somewhere else? And what happens when that announcement gives the target 2 more years to operate? The answer, according to officials who spoke after the May 2026 strike, was fog. Not conspiracy. Fog. A firefight in a forest, a body with partial identification, pressure to announce results, and a name that fit. By the time the intelligence community quietly accepted the error, Al-Minuki had already expanded into his new role. The UN Analytical Support and Sanctions Monitoring Team released its assessment in February 2026. He had been elevated to the head of the General Directorate of Provinces, Director of Global Operations, the de facto number 2 in the entire Islamic State hierarchy. He had risen from a false obituary to the top of the most wanted list on Earth. In late 2025, U.S. Nigerian relations fractured. On Christmas Day, American forces conducted unilateral airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Sokoto State without Nigerian coordination. Abuja called it a sovereignty violation. Washington said it was necessary. The partnership that both countries depended on for counter-terrorism operations in the region nearly collapsed entirely. What followed was months of quiet reconstruction. The United States deployed approximately 200 military personnel to northeastern Nigeria under a framework where Nigerian authorities retained formal command. A joint intelligence task force began tracking a target who had survived one confirmed death notice and had spent years studying how to move without being seen. He traveled under multiple aliases. He rotated security details. He moved between Abuja and Maiduguri before retreating to the Lake Chad Basin, the same territory where he had first built his network 20 years earlier. The satellite phone, or one very much like it, kept transmitting. By May 2026, the intelligence picture was specific enough to act on. Voiceprint analysis from intercepted satellite communications, real-time digital surveillance, human intelligence from localized networks embedded in the region. AFRICOM. Commander General Dagvin Anderson and Secretary of War Pete Hegseth oversaw the final coordination. The plan called for a capture, alive, if possible. Al-Minuki's knowledge of ISIS's global financial architecture was considered too valuable to destroy. The operation was called for midnight, not dawn, midnight. It commenced at approximately 0001 hours and concluded at 0400, 3 hours, start to finish, in the dark. About 24 Nigerian and American Special Operations commandos, including members of the Navy's SEAL Team 6, were lifted in by helicopter. Their target was a compound on 2 small islands in Lake Chad, familiar terrain to Al-Minuki. He had built his first network in this basin 20 years earlier. He had chosen it because it was hard to reach. That calculation had kept him alive for 2 decades. It did not keep him alive tonight. The commandos attacked Al-Minuki and about 36 fighters. Special forces units blocked escape routes, secured the perimeter, and supported extraction operations. The men inside had been with him for years. They had trained for exactly this: the last stand, the perimeter breached, the exits gone. They knew what a raid sounded like. They fought anyway. The fight lasted over 3 hours. At some point in those 3 hours, it became clear that the compound could not be taken cleanly. The U.S. military had initially sought to capture him. They killed him in an airstrike when it became clear he would not surrender, rather than risk letting him escape. The compound was gone before 4 a.m. No American or Nigerian soldiers were killed. Analysts immediately began examining the cell phones, laptops, and other electronic records recovered from the site, looking for information on ISIS recruitment operations and financial activity across Africa and beyond. The satellite phone, the device that had traced his movements across 5 months and a dozen countries. It was evidence now. Trump called the mission complex and flawlessly executed. He said Al-Minuki had thought he could take refuge in Africa and had no idea he was being tracked. President Tinubu confirmed the strike from Abuja the same morning. Afterward, AFRICOM released a 1-minute clip of aerial surveillance footage. The compound was there. Then it wasn't. The Nigerian presidential spokesperson issued a statement acknowledging the 2024 identification had been wrong. The verification process for the May strike had been, in their phrasing, deliberately stringent and multi-layered. Officials from both governments declared they were 100% certain of identity before the strike was authorized. The satellite phone had been part of the confirmation. Its signal history mapped back years. The man from Mainok was gone. The man who had been declared gone 2 years earlier. What the strike did not change. The 12 provinces remain. The financial channels he managed will find new administrators. The ideological infrastructure he helped build does not die with the person who runs it. Northeastern Nigeria still carries the same fractures, economic, political, religious, that made his original radicalization possible. Military precision can remove a node. It cannot remove the conditions that built one. The Islamic State did not invent bureaucracy, it borrowed it. What Al-Minuki understood, and what his rise demonstrated, is that the most dangerous form of extremism is not the kind that fights from the front. It is the kind that learns to survive in the administrative layer beneath the battlefield, outlasting every strike, every announcement, every obituary written too early. The satellite phone is gone. The network it ran is looking for a new one.